colorful migration, Christmas Island in Australia is crawling with red crabs.
Christmas Island is an underwater mountain where nature used to follow a perfect cycle until the yellow crazy ants arrived. These insects are hands down one of the most destructive species on our planet, creating massive underground cities that span for miles. They were taking over everything, and the red crabs had no way to defend themselves from the acid-spraying horde. So here's the deal. Scientists flew in millions of specialized wasps to act as natural hitmen against the ants. What most people do not realize is how one tiny detail changed the fate of an entire island. Flying mercenaries to the rescue. Christmas Island is actually a giant underwater mountain that is about 3 miles tall. Only about 1,180 feet of it sticks out above the ocean surface. But that small part is home to a world you cannot find anywhere else. It sits 217 miles south of Java and 1,600 miles northwest of Perth, Australia. Because it is so far away from everything else, the creatures there evolved in a very special way. The stars of the show are the red land crabs. Every year, these crabs start a grand march from the forest down to the sea to have their babies. It is a spectacular sight that brings people from all over the globe just to watch. But the yellow crazy ants turned that beautiful march into a nightmare. These ants are one of the most destructive species on the planet, and nobody even knows for sure where they came from. They just showed up by accident in the early 20th century and realized there was nobody to stop them. Without any natural enemies, the ants did not just build nests. They built entire networks that worked like a single giant organism. They created massive underground cities that cover hundreds of acres. In some places, these ant cities are home to billions of insects. One of these mega cities on the island spreads across 1,850 acres. To give you an idea of how big that is, it is more than 3 times the size of the whole country of Monaco. The ants are everywhere, with over 1,000 of them found in every 10 square feet of ground. They even live high up in the trees. Because they are so aggressive, any crab that accidentally walks into ant territory is in immediate danger. The ants use a powerful acid to blind the crabs and take away their sense of direction. Once the crab cannot move, the ants swarm over it. It is estimated that these ants have already wiped out 1/3 of the entire crab population on the island. The crazy part is how the ants use the empty crab homes as nurseries for their own young. If a crab is nearby, it usually only lasts 24 hours before the toxic gases from the antacid end its life. For a long time, the only way people could fight back was by using poisoned bait. Starting in 2001, workers had to walk through the forest by hand to lay down protein granules that the ants like to eat. Sometimes helicopters would fly over and drop the bait from the sky, but most of the work was done on foot by brave rangers. They used a neurotoxin that only affects creatures without spines. It worked for a little while, but the ants always seemed to come back from the parts of the island that people could not reach. It was an expensive and never-ending battle that the humans were losing. The scientists realized they needed a more permanent solution that did not involve constant chemicals. The giant ant cities could not survive without a steady supply of food, and that food came from another invasive bug called the yellow lac-scale insect. These bugs are like tiny vampires that suck the sap out of the island trees. After they drink the sap, they leave behind a sweet liquid called honeydew. The crazy ants absolutely love this stuff because it is full of energy. In fact, the ants protect these scale insects just like farmers protect their cows. They drive away any other predators, so the scale insects can keep producing that sweet syrup. This relationship is what allowed the ant population to explode to such high numbers. What most people do not realize is that if you take away the sweet liquid, the ants start to starve. One experiment showed that if the ants are cut off from the scale insects, their activity on the ground drops by 95% in just 4 weeks. It is hard for an army to fight when it has an empty stomach. But the scale insects were also hurting the forest on their own. When there are too many of them, they put so much stress on the trees that the leaves start to fall off. If this happens year after year, the trees actually start to dry out and die. On top of that, the sweet liquid they drop encourages mold to grow on the branches. This mold stops the trees from being able to use sunlight for energy. Basically, The forest was being attacked from two sides at once. The ants were taking out the crabs, and the scale insects were taking out the trees. This is why the scientists spent years looking for a way to manage the scale insects biologically. They needed to find a natural enemy from the homeland of the scale insects and bring it to Christmas Island to restore the balance. They eventually found their target in Southeast Asia, a tiny wasp that is only 0.08 inches long. This wasp is a winged hitman that specifically looks for female scale insects. It lays its eggs inside them, and when the eggs hatch, the scale insect is gone. These wasps are so effective in their home range that you hardly ever see scale insects there. The best part is that these wasps do not build nests, they do not sting humans, and they do not bother any other animals or plants. They have one job and one job only. A single wasp can take out over 150 scale insects in its short life. Even though they are considered a pest in places that produce natural resin, they were exactly what Christmas Island needed. The researchers from La Trobe University and Parks Australia led the mission to bring these wasps to the island. They did not just dump them into the woods and hope for the best, though. For 3 years, they studied every possible risk to make sure the wasps would not hurt anything else. They even tested the wasps on 8 other types of insects in Malaysia to make sure they would only go after the yellow lac scale insects. The wasps passed every test. They even realized that the wasps did not care if the ants were guarding the bugs. They would attack anyway. It was the most researched biological control project in the history of Australia because the stakes were so high. They started by releasing 18,000 wasps across 4 different ant habitats to see if they could break the food chain. The plan was to slowly starve the ant empire by removing their favorite sugary snack. Battle for the birds. To see if this kind of plan could really work, we can look at another place called Johnston Atoll in the North Pacific. This place is a tiny bird paradise about 880 miles away from Hawaii. It is one of the most isolated spots in the world, where tens of thousands of seabirds go to raise their babies. Because there are no natural predators there, the birds build their nests right on the ground. But in 2010, the yellow crazy ants showed up and started a total invasion. They were ending the lives of bird chicks and blinding the adults with their acid. It was a disaster for the red-tailed tropic birds, which had the largest colony in the world on that tiny piece of land. In 2014, a special strike team was formed to take the island back. For nearly 10 years, staff and volunteers worked day and night to eliminate every single ant. They spent over 130,000 hours in the field, which is a massive amount of time for such a small area. They experimented with different baits and traps until they finally found the right combination. But the coolest part of the story involves 2 specially trained dogs. These dogs were taught to sniff out the yellow crazy ants. They walked over 118 miles of the island, sniffing every inch of ground to make sure no ants were left. In December of 2020, the dogs finished their search and did not find a single ant. The invaders were finally gone for good. This success showed the world that it is possible to beat the yellow crazy ants, but Christmas Island is a much bigger challenge. Johnston Atoll is only about 1 square mile, while Christmas Island is 52 square miles. Also, Christmas Island is covered in thick forests and difficult terrain, whereas the atoll is mostly low bushes and flat ground. You cannot just walk across Christmas Island with a couple of dogs and expect to find every ant nest. That is why the WASP project was so important. Instead of trying to find every single ant, the wasps go after the food source that keeps the ants strong. It is a smarter way to fight a war on a much larger scale. Since the wasps arrived on Christmas Island in 2017, the results have been very encouraging. In some areas where there used to be 700 ants in a small space, researchers only found 10. This gave the red crabs a chance to breathe again. They could finally dig their burrows and live in peace without being attacked by an acid-spraying mob. By 2024, the number of adult crabs migrating to the sea reached 100 million. That is a huge jump from the 40 million that were left when the ants were at their strongest. It seems like the tiny wasps are doing their job and the crabs are making a massive comeback. But even with this success, the fight for the island is far from over. Mystery of the island. The red crabs of Christmas Island are far more than just a seasonal spectacle for tourists or a curious biological anomaly. They are the very engine that keeps the island's ancient rainforests breathing and thriving. Often described as a giant cleaning crew, these millions of crustaceans act as the primary janitors of the forest floor, performing a relentless and vital service that sustains the entire ecosystem. Every year, as they scuttle across the damp earth, they consume the massive quantities of fallen leaves, decaying fruits, and emerging seedlings that would otherwise pile up into an impenetrable layer of organic debris. This constant consumption is the mechanism by which nutrients are recycled back into the soil, ensuring that the towering trees and unique tropical flora have the sustenance they need to grow. Without this natural recycling program, the forest floor would become a graveyard of dead matter, locking away the essential elements of life and preventing the next generation of plants from ever taking root. It is a process that has been fine-tuned over millions of years of evolution, creating a landscape that is both lush and remarkably orderly. The true importance of this role became terrifyingly clear when the crab populations began to plummet due to the arrival of invasive species. When the crabs were missing from large swaths of the island, the forest underwent a dramatic and unsettling transformation. The forest floor, once kept clear and tidy by millions of busy claws, began to disappear under thick, suffocating piles of dead leaves that grew several inches deep. This thick carpet of litter did more than just look messy. It physically altered the environment of the woods. The rotting vegetation trapped heat and moisture in ways the forest wasn't designed to handle, fundamentally changing the temperature and humidity of the understory. These shifts in the microclimate created the perfect conditions for invasive weeds to take hold, as the native seedlings that relied on the crabs to thin out the competition were suddenly overwhelmed. Experts who witnessed this shift described the forest as suffocating, a vivid metaphor for an ecosystem that was literally choking on its own waste because its primary caretakers had been silenced. The return of the crabs in recent years has brought a sense of relief and renewal to the island. As their numbers recover, the forest is reclaiming its health, and the visible signs of recovery are everywhere. The thick mats of dead leaves are being cleared away, and the natural thinning process that the crabs provide is ensuring that the forest does not become an overcrowded tangle of competing vegetation. By eating young plants, the crabs essentially act as gardeners, deciding which trees get the space and light required to reach the canopy. This delicate balance is what gives the Christmas Island rainforest its unique structure, a structure that was nearly wiped out in just a few decades by the accidental introduction of the yellow crazy ant. These ants, tiny as they are, nearly toppled an entire biological kingdom, showing how quickly a system that took millions of years to build can be dismantled by a single external threat. The relationship between the locals and the red crabs is one of deep respect and protective care. On Christmas Island, the residents do not just tolerate the crabs, they actively rearrange their lives to accommodate them. During the peak of the mass migration, when millions of crabs move from the forest to the sea to spawn, the community steps up in a way that is rarely seen elsewhere in the world. They close down major roads, sometimes for weeks at a time, to ensure that the migrating crabs are not crushed under the wheels of cars. They build specialized crab bridges and tunnels, engineering the island's infrastructure to prioritize the safety of the crustaceans. In the past, some locals viewed the crabs through a more utilitarian lens, using their movements as a signal for the best times to go fishing or observing them as a simple part of the scenery. However, that perspective has shifted into a profound realization that the crabs are a protected treasure. Today, harming a red crab is not just a social faux pas, it is a legal offense. Even the idea of eating them has faded, with most people acknowledging that they don't have much culinary value anyway. Their true worth is recognized as being far beyond anything that could be served on a plate. They are the architects of the island's survival. Without the red crabs, the entire biological identity of Christmas Island would eventually vanish. The island is home to unique birds, lizards, and plants that exist nowhere else on Earth, and all of them are tethered to the health of the forests that the crabs maintain. If the crabs were to disappear permanently, the resulting collapse of the forest structure would trigger a domino effect, leading to the extinction of countless other species. The crabs effectively carry the weight of the entire island ecosystem on their backs, making them one of the most significant keystone species in the world. This realization has driven scientists to work tirelessly to find a permanent solution to the ant problem, knowing that the stakes are nothing less than the survival of an entire world in miniature. However, the struggle is far from over. The yellow crazy ants remain a persistent and dangerous threat, not only to the crabs but to humans and pets as well. These ants do not bite in the traditional sense. Instead, they spray formic acid, which blinds and eliminates the crabs, and can cause painful irritation to other animals. When ant numbers reach a certain threshold, they form supercolonies that can silence entire stretches of the forest, turning a vibrant habitat into a quiet, dead zone. This ongoing danger is why the scientific community is constantly looking for the next tactical advantage in this ecological war. In 2021, a significant announcement was made regarding the potential introduction of another type of micro-wasp from Africa. This wasp is intended to bolster the efforts of the wasps already released on the island, providing a multi-layered defense against the invasive ants. The strategy behind using these wasps is a fascinating example of biological control. The wasps do not attack the ants directly. Instead, they target the scale insects that provide the ants with honey-dew, a sugary substance that serves as the ants' primary food source. By reducing the number of scale insects, the wasps effectively starve the ants, preventing them from forming the massive supercolonies that are so destructive. However, introducing a new species is always a gamble. The African wasp under consideration is viewed as a pest by farmers on the mainland because of how it interacts with certain crops. This creates a difficult dilemma for researchers. They must weigh the potential risk to mainland agriculture against the urgent need to save the red crabs. It is a high-stakes move that requires years of rigorous testing and observation. But given the alternative, the total loss of the Christmas Island ecosystem, many believe it is a risk worth taking. What often goes unmentioned is that this entire situation is a mystery that is still very much unfolding in real time. We are currently in the middle of a massive biological experiment, and no one can say for certain what the long-term outcome will be. While the current wasps seem to be winning the battle and allowing the red crabs to reclaim their home, there is always the possibility that the ants will find a way to adapt. Evolution is a powerful force, and invasive species are notoriously resilient. Scientists are constantly asking if there is a key detail they might be missing, some subtle interaction between these species that could change everything over the next few decades. For now, the visual of the red crabs returning to the forest floor is a reason for optimism, a sign that the flying army of wasps is doing its job. The story of the red crabs and the yellow crazy ants is a powerful reminder of how something incredibly small can have a massive, world-altering impact. It is a narrative of human error and the attempt to make amends. 100 years ago, humans accidentally brought the ants to the island, likely through shipping and trade, setting off a chain reaction that nearly destroyed a prehistoric paradise. Now, we are watching nature, with a little help from modern science, try to fix that mistake. The return of the crabs is a symbol of hope, but it also serves as a sobering lesson on the fragility of isolated ecosystems. Islands like Christmas Island are like closed loops. They are incredibly efficient, but also incredibly vulnerable to outside interference. Every time we introduce a new species to fix a problem, we are essentially rolling the dice with the future. As we look toward the future, the central question remains, will the wasps be enough to keep the peace for the next century? Or is this just another temporary chapter in a much longer struggle for survival? The complexity of nature means that there are rarely simple answers or permanent fixes. Instead, there is a constant state of flux, a shifting balance between predator and prey, resident and invader. The red crabs continue their tireless work, unaware of the international scientific efforts being made to protect them, focused only on the leaves at their feet and the call of the ocean. It is a wild and unpredictable world, and as the situation on Christmas Island shows, sometimes the smallest creatures, whether they are crabs, ants, or tiny wasps, are the ones holding the entire fabric of reality together. The ongoing efforts to protect this island serve as a testament to our growing understanding of ecological interconnectedness and our responsibility to protect the delicate wonders that remain. Could this tiny wasp be the ultimate hero, or are we just inviting a new mystery into the forest? Let me know what you think about this strange war in the comments below. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more insane nature stories.